What's good, BFA? I have one thing I want to note before I get into the individual models, which is getting things the correct scale. I think this is something that you should have gotten locked in last week, and it looks like there's still some issues here. So I wanna talk about this. Basically, your models need to be the correct scale in Unreal. A couple of them, this looks about right. This too small. Tire looks about right. So we got these two appear to be about the correct scale, and then this one's very small. This one, I think, yeah, this one looks about half size or something like that. And then obviously the gun is very big. And I did notice that in some of the screenshots you guys had posted, you were previewing it in like the blueprint editor, which is fine. But notice how this is scaled. This is custom scaled within the engine. So this is 1.2 scale. If I look at some of the other ones, let's see. Yeah, this one's scaled to 4.6000709, etc. Now, so the reason that you shouldn't do this is because you got to think about it in like a game studio scenario, right? Let's say you make a sword, you check it into the game, you add it, you create your custom sword blueprint, and you scale your sword up to 4.6000709, right? Um, and then let's say a month later, you're out on vacation and your coworker needs to use your sword for something. So they innocently grab your sword model and pull it into the game, and they're like, "What the hell? This sword is tiny. It must have been scaled up at some point, right? But scaled up by how much?" And if they're very good at Unreal and very proactive, they might use the reference viewer in Unreal to figure out where your blueprint is. If they're lucky, there's just one blueprint, and there's not a few blueprints with the sword scaled to different sizes, which is something that I've seen. If they're less proactive or less familiar with Unreal, they might be really confused, and they might have a really hard time finding the right blueprint with the right scale. And so basically, you always want to have your model be correctly scaled before it gets into Unreal. So your blueprint, if at all possible, should be using a 1:1:1 scale. um and same goes for like rotation and all that stuff. So that's something I would just say is make sure that's fixed as soon as possible, because you want to be working at correct scale all the time. And what you can do, easily, is just scale it in Unreal, put it next to the guy, and go, what's a good scale for this? Something like that. I don't know. And then you just look at the scale that you've got and you copy that value into Maya and freeze the transforms and everything. So then you've got a correctly scaled model, re-import it, and then in your in-world version, you just reset the transform to 1:1:1. So yeah, just make sure that's done ASAP, because if you're working again in a studio, you want to have representative models and not be like fixing them after the fact, because that just creates more work for other people. Yeah, all right. So let's look at the models individually. Okay, so Mars Pizza Oven. Yes. Big props for going ahead and getting a UV'd and sculpted and baked thing done in an engine here. That's awesome. General notes, I would say you definitely want more faces on the round stuff, on these, on this, maybe on this. That might be okay. There's a bit of stuff where it looks like there's detail left out from the concept. Like here, and the way these are attached here, there's like two levels to this door. There's an interior, metal layer, and then there's like a painted red. There's detail on the interior of the pizza oven, and then importantly, there's a whole bunch of stuff inside this tube that's sort of a focal point that you really want to model and do a really good job on, because that's like one of the main things people are going to look at in this model, and right now it is not modeled. Obviously, this is a very intense, ambitious asset to try to do in this assignment's time frame. So, that's understandable, but that would be my sort of notes on the modeling. I'd also add, I would say, remove like 80% of the dents. There's just sort of similarly scaled dents all over the model, which might work better for like a ancient stone thing, but for like a mechanical object, usually something like this might be dented more around the feet or places that are exposed to danger. Stuff up higher, less likely. And if there are dents, there would be probably more like one or two large dents rather than like an equal number of small dents all over it, right? Unless you ran it through the dryer with a bunch of rocks. So otherwise, like nice sculpting, nice job getting it this far by Monday. That's super awesome. I'm gonna have some notes next on the there's some issues with how the normal bake is coming out. And I'm gonna flag some of those real quick. Some of them have to do with UV stuff. So yeah, let's take a look at that. So if I'm looking at the UVs, I've been looking at the UVs, and I have been running into some things like right here, for example. These faces, the red ones, are just not like, they don't have any UV space. Like if I go and smooth this, wherever the smooth tool is, I can never find it. Right? There's some bad stuff going on there. And I'm seeing a fair amount of that throughout the model. And it looks like maybe what happened is you were modeling and UV'd it and then went back in to add more detail and started extruding stuff. So you just want to make sure that usually you want to UV at the very end of your modeling pass. And if you do UV before that, you want to make sure that you're maintaining those UVs as you add stuff to the model. So that's an issue that definitely could use correction. Like I said, I would love to see some more faces on everything. If you have to come in under a face budget, there's a ton of stuff here that could be removed. All these edges on the back, for example, are not really doing anything for you. You know, lots and lots of faces on this thing or edges on this thing are not doing anything for you. You know, like if you need an edge loop for something like this that's extruded, that doesn't mean that you can't, you know, lose the rest of it like this, right? And just control delete the edge, right? And then keep doing that throughout. I think you'll find you will gain back like a shitload of triangles that you spent, and be able to use those more productively, like adding more faces to the joints and stuff like that. So that's something I would recommend. I won't go in and do a pass on that for the demo, but yeah, definitely take a look at that. And then you're having some specific issues with the normal bakes. So right here, this looks kind of wacky. And the reason for that is basically I have a video from a past class, UV maps and normal baking demo, that sort of goes over all the issues that you might run into. So I'm going to just link that rather than sort of cover that ground again. But basically, anytime you have a normal map seam, you want that to be a hard edge in the smoothing. And anytime you have no normal map seam or no UV seam, you want that to be a soft edge. So let's see. I actually have a script for this that just fixes it. So that's what it should look like. It should be hard there and soft elsewhere. Up here, you have sort of the opposite problem. You don't have a UV seam here, but you do have a hard edge, and that's what produces this other effect, which is the sort of weird pixelated seam that is sort of hard to figure out what you're looking at. Again, that's detailed here and how to handle that. So hopefully this video will be useful in terms of addressing that stuff. Yeah, apart from that, you know, stuff's looking good. I would avoid, this thing was kind of weird. There's sort of some Z fighting that looks unfinished. This looks kind of blockouty. You definitely want to clean up geometry like this and make sure you don't have holes in your chimneys. There's holes here. If I turn on backface culling, that's just not filled in, which you want to avoid. Yeah, keep in mind for the interiors of chimneys and stuff like that, you don't need to necessarily hold as much UV space for them as you would for like something that's going to be actually visible. But yeah. Oh yeah, and then the one other thing was the four legs are similar enough that I would not give them each their own texture space. I would just like get rid of 3 of them. UV1, allocate the UV space for one, and then just duplicate them afterward, after the bake process, and suddenly you have more texture space by quite a lot. Same goes for some of this stuff. I would probably just do one hand, maybe keep the sleeves, because I think you know, the cloth folds would look a little more obvious being mirrored, but Hand's probably good to duplicate, etc. Yeah, so just look for opportunities to reuse UV space because that can give you more texture resolution on your asset. But yeah, that's basically it for this one. Nice work. Next, Sneha's waterfall, or fountain, rather. Since this is correctly scaled, I can run up to it in Unreal and jump on it, which is dope. Um, Hell yeah. So I think you had some good notes. You had really good observations about the sort of the materiality of your reference game, which is excellent, and some good questions. So I want to address a couple of those. First was, what can you do about poly count on this thing? So I'm going to do a little demo for that. So, as far as reducing poly count on here, there are two main things I would take a look at. One of them is just any, like I mentioned on the previous asset, any edge that's not doing anything for you. For example, this one. This you have this whole ring around the interior here, and it's not defining the shape of the model at all. If you were making a high poly, it would hold a bit of a crease, but this is a low poly, so it's not doing anything. So what I would do with it is Control delete it, and now you've gained some space back. Even now, a bunch of these loops probably don't need to be there either. So I might start bringing these in. And that should bring the poly count down a little bit. One thing I'm noticing is the construction, like, these don't need to be like this, right? This should all be probably sealed together. Like, cause you have this whole set of polygons. Again, this would be fine for the high poly if you're sculpting sort of stonework that's been pieced together. But these faces aren't visible at all in the game. And as it is, they're going to be being, paid for in performance, and also you might feel like you have to UV them. So I would, get rid of stuff like that. I'm going to, let's see, delete this. Let's see what we've got going on here. And I'm just going to combine these and see if I can merge these. Yeah, okay. It's messed up the smoothing, but that's okay. There we go. And then now I'll also notice that, like, this is basically a straight line. So once again, that's an edge that's not doing any work for me. A lot of these edges are not doing any work for me. So I would go in and, weld these out. You can be very merciless with this stuff. If it's not affecting the silhouette of the model, you basically don't need it. There's a whole edge in here that's actually, what the fuck? I don't know why that's not edge selecting. That's a bad sign. Oh, it's because there's an extrusion in here. Okay, so I'm going to try to get rid of that and merge that down again. See if that's different now. Yeah, okay. Now I can select the whole thing, delete it. That has saved me some faces as well. I could, once again, aggressively weld these out since they're not doing anything for me. Rest of this, I think, is fine. I do want to check underneath this thing to see if there's an underside. It appears that there is not a whole thing, but just a bit of a lip there, so we can get rid of that. So that's that basically taken care of. And as I noticed earlier, there's a lot going on under here that is not doing anything for us. I think, since this is going to be seated on the ground, it's probably safe to just get rid of all of it. Unless you're expecting to be looking up at the bottom of the fountain at some point, somehow. So that's gone. That should help. Let's see. Again, yeah, there's a lot of stuff throughout the model that's it's having this issue of like this is how you would construct your high poly, but you don't want to construct your low poly this way. Um, you know, that's another edge that's not visible. There's a bunch of faces inside here that aren't visible. Let's see what's going on. And then yeah, these edges are you know, I see how they're continuing these loops, but on this side, once again, they're not actually doing any work for you, so you can let me make sure. Oh, these are not the same. Okay. Start merging these together. You can just do that. And do that all the way around. You have a piece. In fact, might do this. This starts to create some long slivers of faces, which are not usually a good idea. So I might leave that, but be probably better. If I was doing that, probably be better to have this whole edge loop all the way around, more like that. And actually, if you bring it up here, now you can merge that, and it's no problem. And also, you can probably just merge it out like that if you want. Probably not worth it, but yeah. So all stuff like that. Actually, I saw something weird just now. Oh yeah, you got a bunch of inside faces. Maybe this is from something I did, but yeah, I would just look inside everything. Look for any faces that are not visible. Look for any faces that are not holding a shape, and you can trim out a ton. Okay, that was doing something. Whoops. But yeah, again, like you usually want game res meshes to be pretty watertight. You know, it would be better to have this connected right here, rather than sort of just clipping through. It's not strictly necessary, but for certain things in games, it can be better. Like the lumen lighting in Unreal does a better job of like calculating lighting on objects if they are watertight. And you know, there's other reasons to have watertight meshes as well. You get better bakes, stuff like that. So yeah, that's one thing to do about your poly count. The other thing I was going to mention is if you're starting from a cylinder, if you have like a radial object like this, you don't have to maintain the same number of sides for every part of the cylinder, especially if it has really wide and really narrow aspects. So in this case, like you have this like narrowest point and it's got however many faces this is. And if I extrude that out, I see that it's the same number of faces that are on the outermost part of the fountain. And you know, that doesn't really make sense because this is a much bigger shape. It looks much blockier. It looks more faceted compared to this very high density part of the cylinder. So, especially if you have these as separate pieces, you can pretty well, you know, start working with this. Also, actually, this is one thing. I would probably fuse these. Let's see if that works. It did not. There we go. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, what I would do here is probably make a new cylinder that's like, I don't know, let's take a guess. 64. 64 looks decent. Yeah, 64 is fine. For something this wide, I think that's safe. You know, and then I'd start modeling the not the inner part, but the outer pieces out of this, you know, 64 wide piece. And then for the upper area, I think this also needs more resolution. So I'd maybe say, what's half of that? 32? Let's do a 32. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's a little. And maybe you need to change those numbers slightly to make sure that you have your. Oh no, that should work actually. Yeah, so you would want to model it like that, and then as you start to get down to the more narrower parts of it, it's completely fine to just start, you know, like tying these off. Maybe not this aggressively. You kind of have to use, your best judgment to decide when to do this and how much to do it. But it is completely fine to say, hey, this is about to become a cylinder with a lot less sides when it gets down here. And that'll help a lot too, and that'll help you preserve your tri count. Now, for your other question, which was to do with like how to do good water for this, I will say that's probably out of scope for this the game prop assignment, just because it gets into materials and effects, and there's probably not time to really do a job of it. I would try to do like probably a static water effect. With that being said, if you're going to try to use this for your environment later, or if you just want to spend more time on it later, I can absolutely go into some stuff you can do around the water. So I have some stuff to show. So I've added a plane of water here and then a waterfall here. You'll notice the geometry is somewhat dense, and I'll show you why shortly. But first, I'm just going to make sure this is UV'd properly. Good planar UV is usually good. That's not good, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be pointed in the right direction, top to bottom. And maybe I can straighten this out. Yeah. Okay. And actually what I'm going to do is scale this. You'll notice beyond the 0 to 1 UV boundary. That's completely fine. That means the texture will tile, which in this case is what we want. So I'm going to export these out. I already did, but I forgot to UV them. So fountain waterfall, fountain water. Okay. And here is something else that I'll get to in a second. Okay, so if I drag in my water, don't worry about that. Drag in my waterfall. Don't worry about that. I can now save these two assets. I can drag in the water. I can grab the location, copy the location from the fountain, and then select the water plane and paste the location in there, pop it right into place. So now I have untextured water. So what can we do with this? The other thing that I was going to show, Substance Designer, I've just made a Perlin noise and exported a grayscale texture out of it, and also a normal map based on it, which we will use in a second. So let me pull those in. Make sure those are saved. Make sure this grayscale texture is grayscale. Good. We're all good. So I'm going to go ahead and make a material for this. Drag in my two textures. And for now, I'm just going to make this an unlit texture, so it doesn't need to be shaded. It'll be a little bit easier to see for now. And I'm going to throw that onto the water plane. Let it compile. There we go. So that doesn't look much like water, but we can start doing stuff with it. First of all, I'm going to create a panner. And the panner can plug into the UVs on the texture sample. And if I change the speed X and speed Y on this thing, it's going to start panning the texture. So now it's just sort of moving in one direction. And let's see. What I'm going to do now is going to make a second one. And I'm going to make a second panner. And now I'm going to make it go the other way. And I'm going to try to make it go the other way at sort of a random amount. So 0.11. I don't want it to be sort of a multiple of the first one. So let's see. 0.08. That's on the first one. Going back to the second one. Negative 0.11. Also, yeah, I want the second panner to be going sort of the opposite direction. 0.92. Yeah, okay. That should be good enough. Just going to plug that in. And now I want to overlay these two together. So I'm going to use a blend overlay. And looks like I made a mistake. That should be 0.092. And now these two Perlin noises are panning over each other at sort of a random speed so they don't line up, hopefully. And you get kind of this undulating look to it. One thing is, despite my numbers, there is like a small chance that the two textures will perfectly line up with each other. So one thing I could do is get, a texture coordinate. So actually, let me demo this. Just going to go back and plug in an unpanned version of this texture. Plug in the texture coordinate. And basically, if you don't plug in a texture coordinate, you get sort of an implied texture coordinate with the default values. But basically, you have a few options here. One of them is the coordinate index, which is the UV set. So in Maya, you can create multiple UV sets. If you ever want to use a second UV set as part of a material, you change this to 1, 2, or whatever, but 0 is the default. Then we have UV tiling. So if I change this to like 5 and 5, you're going to get a much more tiled version of this, right? So basically, what I want to do is instead of that, I just want to do like 1.1, right? So now they're not exactly the same size, these two textures. And I'm just going to plug this coordinate into the coordinate input on the panner and get rid of this guy. And plug it back in. So this should look pretty much the same, but it eliminates that danger of the two textures perfectly lining up. And there we go. So there's a few things that we can now do with this. Actually, one thing that we should do is use the normal map. So I'm going to duplicate the normal map as well. And I'm going to bring these panners down. And I'm going to plug them into the UVs of these two normals. And then I'm going to do a, blend angle corrected normals. That is the way to combine two normal maps in the material editor here. So use those. And an unlit material cannot use a normal map because it has no lighting, but I'm about to change that. So I'll just put it back to translucent. And now it has an opacity input. And so instead of using this for the emissive, oh yeah, and for translucent, I can also set that to default lit. So for opacity, I'm not going to use this for opacity. See how that looks. Eventually. Maybe, maybe not. It may be that this is a version of Unreal where this is nanite and it will not render translucent stuff, so I will disable nanite support. That may fix this here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now you can see the opacity of the water is affected by this stuff. I'm actually going to do a couple things here. One is going to create like a color for it. Make some blue water here. And I'm also going to, oh yeah, for translucent, you also still can't use a normal map because it's set to low quality lighting mode. I'm just going to set it to the max quality, which is probably a bad idea in general, but for the purposes of this demo, I can now use the normal map. So I'm going to plug the normal map in here. And I'm also going to, yeah, let's see. Let's take a look. Yeah, actually, let's leave out the black and white part here for a second. Just set the opacity to 0.5 so we can see the normal map a little bit better. Whoa, how'd we get out here? All right. Yeah, so as you can see, the normal map is now doing sort of the same undulation effect, which looks a little bit watery. Probably want to set the roughness to 0 so it's more shiny. It's a pretty appalling color for water, so I'm going to take that down a little bit. Obviously, for your stylized water, you may not want to use all these techniques in this way, but this is just something you can do. And basically, I think it's cool to get into the material editor. Now, there's one more trick I want to show with the standing water here, which is the world position offset. Once this finishes saving, if this finishes saving, yeah, cool. All right, yeah. So here we have this node called the world position offset. So what I want to do is make a multiply node, plug this in here, and then I'm gonna add a parameter here, WPO height, and I'll start with 1, plug that into the multiply, and then plug that into the world position offset. Actually, I have to do one more thing. I have to also multiply this by vertex normal WS, which is world space. So this will basically cause it to offset vertices away from the normal of the model, basically the surface direction. So multiply this. My computer's going through it today. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I've opened too much crap. Okay. It's probably going to look pretty much the same, but if I start dialing up this parameter to 100, say, look at that. Oh my God. Well, obviously that's too much, right? So maybe take it down to 10. And we're using that grayscale height map from before to offset the vertices. And that's now, you see why I added so much geometry here, because it is actually offsetting the individual vertices. And so if you don't have enough, it's not going to look very good. But since I have a decent amount of density, now I get some 3D water effect on here. So secondly, I can do something similar with the waterfall. Oh my God. Let's throw that in here. And this time, I'm going to make sure nanite is turned off. Save that. And then copy and paste the location again. Actually, I'm going to save everything because last time some crazy stuff happened. Good grief. All right, here's our waterfall. I'm going to throw the waterfall material on it right now. It looks terrible, but we can start fixing this. So the first thing I want to do is shrink the texture coordinate, the UV tiling. So I'm going to do 0.1, 0.1, or 0.01 actually. See how that looks. That looks bad actually. Yeah. No, you know what? We gotta go back a few steps. No more wacky stuff. Okay. I'm going to plug this into both these UVs here. Just going to cause it to overlay the exact same image on itself, but that's okay for a second. I'm going to disconnect the normal, and I'm going to connect this back into the base color. And I cannot see anything, so I'm going to actually set this back to unlit, so I'm making sure I'm seeing what I need to see. Okay. And this needs to be plugged into emissive. So this may be too big. So what I can do is go to, let's say 0.5, 0.5. There we go. So that's something, right? Let's disconnect the WPO as well. Now for the waterfall, I think what I want to do is to make it look like the water's moving, I'm going to make the tiling more in this direction. So actually, keep that at 1. Make this much smaller, like 0.2. Let's see what 0.2 looks like. So it's starting to get stretched vertically, right? Based on the U and V tiling. Might even stretch it some more. There we go. No, actually, more. Cool. So that's good. I have that. And I'm going to do a second one that's almost the same. So 1.1.06. Because I'm going to have 2 panners. I'm going to do the 2 panner thing again. But this time I need to customize the UVs on both of them. So plug those in. And I'm going to start with 0 for the panner speed, because I want to tune this again. See how that looks overlaid? And now I'm going to just add a 1 here and see what the 1 does. That's going the wrong direction, so I'm going to put a negative. I don't really know if that's the right speed. I think it's okay. So then for the second one, I'm going to put a negative 1.1, and then I'm going to put like a 0.05 or 0.01, negative 0.02 or something like that for the horizontal movement, just so we get a little more of that undulation. And maybe that's a little fast, so I'm going to do negative 0.8. Maybe negative 0.7 for the other one. See how that looks. Still kind of fast. A lot of this is kind of hand tuning. Okay, I'm happy with this. So I'm getting more of an undulation effect once again. And now I can sort of plug this back. I can set this back to how it was. So go back to translucent, go back to default lit. This is set to surface forward shading as it should be. Plug the base color back in the way it was. Plug the world position offset back in. Plug the normal back in. And as you can see, I'm getting some of that world position offset on the waterfall as well. And it's a little high for this, so I'm going to turn that down. You'll notice it's invisible from behind, but I can go and turn on two-sided. Fix that. And it's glowing because I forgot to disconnect the emissive color. There we go. Now, this does not look very good, but you could definitely get in here and start to dial the colors, figure out if you want to blend the colors based on this mask, you know, it gets pretty in-depth material effects. You could go in and start, you know, having waves coming out from where the waterfall is landing. You could also create a Niagara particle system, which is an entirely separate video I could do, which I probably don't have time for tonight. But there's lots of videos on that on YouTube. Anyway, yeah, this is not intended to be a like how to make a waterfall and fountain that looks good, but rather just an introduction to the types of stuff you can do with materials in Unreal. So hopefully this is useful and interesting and inspirational. You could definitely get into something like this for your environments. So yeah, thank you for asking. Very good question. Okay, Morgan's tire. I really appreciate that it is exactly 2,000 triangles. With that being said, I think there's a reduction that you could do, and I also think that maybe like a bit more faces around the larger areas, the in the outside of the rim and also the tire itself would probably be beneficial. It looks pretty good, but I don't know, for a current gen game, it might be nice to have a few more, and maybe it will be permissible to go a little over because I don't know. Even if I cut a bunch of stuff here, there might be enough. It might not be enough to like gain you the extra. But let's see what we can do here. Um, Obviously, these edge loops are not doing anything for you for the low poly. Whoa. So just lose those. Yeah, stuff on the inside here in particular. Um, you can definitely clean this up, I think. Just lots that's not doing work for you. That's pretty ugly. Okay. And this is an inexact science, so forgive me if I make some bad decisions here. Or do something that's inconsistent. I think there's anyway, yeah, there's tying off of loops that you can do here. Um let's see. This thing is kind of wacky. Smoothing is, I guess you haven't UV'd it, so the smoothing's going to be kind of fucked. But either way, you know, you can do that. If that's a straight line, probably don't need that edge, even though it's not straight. It's only a little bit not straight. Um, yeah, etc., etc. This is slightly giving you a curve here, but you could probably just ditch it and let the normal map do that work. I don't know. I think overall it's pretty clean, right? There's not that much for me to do here. I think in here I would want to see, is that flat? Yes. So you definitely don't need all these. Um, Again, I'm being a little inconsistent with how I'm tying these off, and you probably want to be symmetrical and everything, but you know. And just from that stuff, I have bought myself almost 300 triangles, which is pretty good in a 2,000 triangle budget. Again, I don't know if that's going to be enough to, you know, um, add extra sides to the tire, but I think it would be worth going a little over 2,000 just to get a slightly smoother tire. I think the inside level of detail you have is good. I think I don't love that there's like this is more faceted than these. Um, Maybe that's something to look at as well. But yeah, overall, this is nice. And I also did want to comment on. Do I have the fucking file here? No, damn it. Um, yeah, I wanted to comment. This is a really nice high poly. Really clean geo, great shape. So yeah, nice work. That's gonna, I think, bake out to a very nice looking asset. Okay, Lindsey's minecart. I like the revisions with the new rocket, the new stuffed animal. That's cool. Um, this organization is useful to take a look at things. Let's see. It looks to me like these all are one UV set, and then the lights are a separate UV set, um, which is fine. I'm not sure if they need to be a separate UV set. I don't think, like, you don't really need to UV each one of the lights, right? Um, at most, you could UV one of each color, but that's something that you could set up in the material in Unreal and just UV a single grenade light and then make variants of the material, which would work pretty well. So I think you could probably condense this to one set of UVs. With that being said, the UVs that are here look pretty nice. Some stuff like, so oh yeah, there's baking issues that are similar to what I pointed out with the other one. Let me grab the screenshot here. As you probably can see, there's seams around like a lot of the edges here, baking seams basically. And again, that is from a mismatch between the soft and hard edges on your mesh and the seams in your UV. So right here, this is a hard edge, but there's no UV seam. And that's going to produce the type of visual seam that you're seeing on the model. So basically, once again, I have my script that will fix this, but you want your UV seams and your hard and soft edges to be perfectly aligned. Now, this looks terrible. And that's because you probably actually don't want to UV something like this way. You'd want to UV it like this so that your smoothing groups are more aligned with your UVs. If you have like a 90-degree angle, you want to break that UV and not have it like seam. You don't want to have those stitched together. And that's basically what's bringing up the issue here is like, obviously, this is really bad smoothing. And that's because of the way it's UV'd. So if you split these apart and UV it sort of in a more straight on way with more split edges, that will work better. I think in the past, in old days in games, you wanted to have as few UV seams as possible, but now with like Substance Painter and stuff, a UV seam is not really a big deal unless you're trying to get some like perfect tiling pattern or whatever. So yeah, I would recommend if you go back and revise the UVs, just try to aggressive. Check out the video that I mentioned. It's going to be linked in the description. Stuff about how to get your best UV bakes, because there's definitely improvements that can be made there. It looks here like there's faceting on the wheels that you don't want to have there, so that's something to check on. But overall, yeah, I think it's a clean model. And yeah, UVs are pretty nice. So what was the other thing? Ah, yes. The normal maps are turned in as a PDF. I cannot put a PDF into Unreal, so this is not very useful. So please turn them in as targas. But also, I don't know why there's 9 of them. I guess because you had 9 materials when you sent it into Substance Painter. But really, you want when you're baking in Substance, you want one material assignment per UV set. So this would be one material, and then this would be one material if you continue to use these as 2 separate UV sets. Yeah, but in general, like I still think you could fit the lights up here and have the texel density with the rest of the minecart be pretty consistent. So you could probably do this in one bake, but yeah, you want to make sure this is all applied to one material so you don't get a bunch of like wasted space, right? Because there's all these separate pieces that are each not using most of the image. So yeah, that's one thing to do. Should be pretty easy and just rebake that. But yeah, I'm liking the way this is going. Nice work. Lastly, E's gun here. I think so there's a bit of an issue here, which is it looks like you didn't do the high poly part of the assignment. And that's really critical. Any game pipeline, I think, pretty much any game pipeline is going to have you sculpting or modeling a super high poly version of the mesh and then baking down your normal details from that. It's not really a step that you can skip. So I would definitely go back and do that. Usually you would do your high poly first and then retopologize it to create your final low res game asset. I can see the normal map is all this detail is coming from like substance materials, which is not what you want. And also seems like there's some smoothing issues on the low poly. So yeah, I think you want to take a few steps back and do the full creation pipeline here before you get into materials. But yeah, I think the low poly, the blockout's looking pretty good. It's a good prop. It's a good size prop for this assignment. So yeah, I think this will be able to turn out pretty well. Yeah, and I think that's all I'm doing for today. Thanks for sharing your work, everybody, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here.